Welcome back to Herd Tell. Okay, we're excited to have her. She has become our Western correspondent because she's out there in the beautiful Front Range of Colorado, which I got to enjoy back in October. We'll talk about that in a minute. Krista Kafer, she's a columnist at the Denver Post. She has a whole bunch of animals, including a cat in her lap if you're watching on the YouTube channel, and we're going to talk to her like we love to do. How are you, ma'am? Great to have you back on the program.
It is good to be back. Yeah, it's rather cold here, but we're having a great day.
Yeah, y'all went through one of the viral videos of the bomb cyclone or whatever everybody went through over the holidays there was the live shot with time lapse of Denver where it went from nice to Antarctica in about 45 minutes. For people that don't live in the mountains and at altitude like that, just explain to them how fast the wet. Look, I was there last week of October and it was 75 every day. Talk to people about just how fast the weather changes on the Front Range up there, because it really is something. You can sit there and watch the weather coming at you.
Yes, it is pretty crazy here because we are at a higher altitude. We get epic hail, unfortunately, in the spring, summer, and fall. I've had golf ball size hail hit my house. To say that if you're in the insurance industry, this might be a good place to relocate. But yeah, it can change it can be 75 degrees in the winter with bright sunshine and then drop down into like the 30s. It's been a cold winter, which I think is nice. I like snow, but not everybody does.
Yeah. All right. So as a columnist, you tackle the important issues of the day. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Or in this case, as you're writing, which came first, the cost increase in poultry or the cost increase in the eggs?
Well, the problem here is that a lot of our poultry has died. So we've lost 6 million birds from avian flu. We've also lost a lot of wild birds, great horned owls, also red-tailed hawks, very susceptible to avian flu. I have a flock of 5 hens. Luckily, they have not gotten avian flu, but it has been a big deal. In fact, in December, I think well over 1 million birds slaughtered because of avian flu, and that has driven the price of eggs up. It's not a Colorado problem exclusively. 47 states have had an issue with avian flu, and it's driven the price of eggs pretty high.
Yeah, Krista Kafer joining us. Here's the problem with eggs is cost of living is going up for everybody. Of course, we know about inflation. Poultry is one of those things that covers a couple different things because they do produce eggs. They're also, they also produce feed for other animals. They also produce meat, chicken as we buy it, which is one of the most popular meats in America. It's also historically supposed to be the cheaper meat, the little bit more affordable meat. So this crosses a couple different streams all at once, doesn't it?
So I don't know that meat hens have been as affected. Meat birds basically have a lifespan of about 6 months. Once hatched, they sit around gaining mass basically for 6 months, and then they're slaughtered. Laying hens usually kept around for about 2 years. I keep mine for the natural lifespan, which is up to 10 years, but usually around 2, they slaughter those birds and they become your Campbell's chicken noodle soup, just because layers are a little too tough for people to have on their kitchen table just as a roasted hen. But yes, it is a big deal. Avian flu is a significant problem. It doesn't actually transfer to humans, but it kills an awful lot of birds.
Yeah, and then the thing that happens here is it gets into, avian flu has been around for a long time. This is something that it almost seems cyclical at this point, right? Every couple of years we have an outbreak of this, but it goes right back into something we've talked about before and we've talked with you about before. Here we go again with a conversation of how do we balance an economic concern, which is, food needs to be as cheap as possible for as many people as possible to afford it, with humanitarian concerns, how these birds are taken care of, even though they are for food production. That's a big deal because when you start talking about losing 6 million birds, the reason you lose so many in avian flu is because they're kept in tight quarters. But it's just like we went through with COVID, infectious disease spreads in bunches. Well, poultry farms, to be cost effective, have to be bunches of birds. I've seen the mountain air farms we have near where I live before. There's no way really around that, but it brings us back to the old conversation again. How do we balance economic concerns and feeding everybody with also being humane to these animals?
And that definitely is a concern. Here in Colorado, 2 years ago, the legislature passed a new law saying that all of the chickens have to have about a square foot of space, which seems pretty minimal, if you ask me. In the past number of decades, the kind of big factory farms have started pushing for tighter and tighter quarters. So you've got a whole bunch of hens in a cage, barely able to move, spend their lives standing on metal bars while eating food and creating eggs. And consumers are saying we don't want that anymore. Yeah, we want economically sound egg policies, but we do not necessarily want animals to be treated cruelly. So consumers are pushing towards more humane options, cage-free and free range. Not exactly the same thing, but at least get these birds out of these cages. Large entities, big restaurants like Burger King, Marriott, and so forth are also moving towards purchasing eggs from humane operations. And now legislatures around the country, maybe less than a dozen, have put forth rules that say if you want to sell eggs in this state, your hens have to have at least a square foot of space, and then starting next year, at least have to be out of the cage. That doesn't mean they, can't be packed into a big room, but at least they can move around a little bit.
Yeah, Krista Kafer joining us. I like it when you wrote about this in your pieces, and we're going to link to her Substack where she reruns her columns as well. This is so much not a new problem that you quoted something from 1641, the Massachusetts Body of Liberties. That is not a, I don't know what that sounds like, but the Massachusetts Body of Liberties was actually a political thing, policy-making arm, I guess you would call it in modern parlance. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because they wrote it in the old English kind of things, but 1641 to today, and here they are talking about the exact same issues.
Yeah, that's the first kind of humane treatment standards set up in this country during the colonial era. But even if we go back in time, if you look at the old Hebrew law, for example, there are some rules in there about how you treat your animals. Even on the Sabbath, if your oxen or your donkey falls into a hole, you still can pull that animal out. There's an expectation that animals that are used as beasts of burden, also animals that are used as food, are treated humanely. And I'm a big meat eater. I love, I love a good steak. I love game. I'm always telling people that I'll trade my homemade jam for any game they can give me. But I don't want animals treated poorly simply so that I can eat their protein. I want animals to be treated well. And if we look at with cattle live pretty decent lives because they spend a good deal of their life out in the field. But pigs and chickens are treated really abysmally in a lot of cases. And I'm 100% behind these new rules to make sure that they've got at least some quality of life while they're alive.
Yeah, Krista Kafer. It's funny you mentioned cows in comparison. Yellowstone's immensely popular, most popular TV show in America right now. The opening scene of the first episode was the bullet line on the first scene was Kevin Costner looking at the cow and going, "Amazing what we do to keep you fed," right? We understand that, livestock is money. It's a commodity, not just food. We talked before with you about pork. Now we're talking about chickens. There does seem to be an overarching, we're joking about this 1641 law that's written about tyranny, and tyranny spelled Tirranny, and cruelty is with an IE at the end. There does seem to be a thread where people are like, okay, look, there's got to be a way to do both with modern technology. This is another one of those things social media changed is because we have pictures inside those facilities. Look, I've been on the kill floor at Smithfield Processing. It is not pretty. People don't want to see that, especially people that want to eat meat. We know what we can see it now, where in the past you couldn't see where your food came from. People want a balance. So where is the balance? Is it going to be a regulatory fix? Is it going to be a legislative fix? Or is it just going to be public pressure in the market saying that? Or is it a combination thereof?
I think it's a combination thereof. So a couple years ago, I started buying cage-free eggs. They're not that much more money. I don't bother with the whole organic thing. And here's a kind of funny thing. People say, you look at these expensive eggs and it'll say vegetarian fed. Well, hens are omnivores. If I throw meat into the pen where I keep my hens, they'll fight over it. They'll share the salad, but they'll fight over the meat. So, if you see organic or vegetarian on that label, it doesn't really mean much, except that those poor hens are deprived the pleasure of meat. But the cage-free option or even the free-range option, I think, is something that customers really need to look for. I also have my own hens, which lay about 10 months out of the year, so I don't even buy eggs much of the time. and I give away a lot of eggs because they're good producers. So I think that consumers can make good choices, but at some point you will always have market pressures, consumers who don't care about humane standards and producers who also do not care about humane standards, and that's where you have to have the legislature stepping in.
Yeah, Krista Kafer joining us. You just mentioned it, so let's talk about it for folks that, like I've got a local pork guy that I go to, but I can only do that about 4 or 5 times a year because he's a small family farm. He can only do it when he goes to processing, and then he calls me like, "Hey, I'm coming back from the processor. What do you want?" I can't feed my family like that, and most other people can, and a lot of people don't even have that options. So when they just go to a grocery store, what are they looking for? Because people label about everything. My local grocery chain does have a local label for certain things, but some folks don't have that. What should they actually look at? Look, you're somebody that pays attention to this. You raise your own chickens, like you said. Give them a few things to look for beyond just the marketing labels to know that they can feel good about what they're getting.
I would look for cage-free or free range. So cage-free means they're not in a cage, but they are in a big facility. There's a lot of birds in one place. It's not necessarily inhumane, but cage-free that's what cage-free is. If you do free range, those animals have a lot more space. And I buy one or the other depending on the price. And then when it comes to meat hens, those hens are also often treated really poorly. And I'm kind of moving away. As much as I love chicken, I am kind of moving away from both chicken and pork unless I can make sure that I'm getting those animals from a humane operation. And I'm just simply eating a lot more beef, just because I know those animals are treated well.
Krista Kafer joining us. Okay, you're out in Colorado, so one of the things is when you're from a particular area of the country and you're a media commentator, you get stuck talking about particular people from that area that you need to commentate on, right?
Yes.
You're everybody's favorite GOP congressperson, and of course that changes based on who you talk to. You wrote about Lauren Boebert. Here's where I want to start with before we get to the speaker fight and her being front and center on that the last few days. When I was out in Colorado into October, of course, they're almost time for the election. I wasn't in her district, but I asked some folks because I was just curious because I'm a national guy. All I know is what I read. You see so I just asked people in Colorado what they thought. I was really surprised because a lot of them's like, hey, we think this is going to be a closer election than you think. People aren't really super happy with her. She had her district redrawn. People actually thought it might be even more favorable towards her. And she underperformed a lot. She barely survived that election. You're actually there. You cover, you're writing about it. Again, we'll link to your Substack on the piece that you wrote about her. You said this is a pretty clear message to her about what she should and shouldn't do if she wants to survive in 2024. We all saw the speaker fight. She was all over the national news. Was that a step towards or a step away from what you were saying she should have learned from the election in 2022?
I'm thinking maybe she didn't learn. So she won by about 500 votes, and this is after scandals came out about her opponent. So, and it's a +8 district. It's a heavily Republican district, and a lot of folks were saying, "I'm tired of her style." In fact, Trump-like candidates did far worse than non-Trump-like candidates in this state, even in very conservative districts. So if you look at her district, the statewide candidates who are not Trumpians, for the most part, did better than her in her own district. People don't like when you scream out during the State of the Union, they don't like that stuff. They don't like, showy, I'm running around with a pistol on my hip and I'm saying stupid stuff. A certain amount of people do like that because they think it's quote unquote fighting back. I'm not sure. It seems more like you're punching the air, but I don't know that she learned the lesson. I also think it's just her. She is, so I call her the plucky pugilist. She likes to fight. She's not a serious person, and she loves the attention. She loves the camera. But you know that you've kind of crossed the line when Sean Hannity takes you to task for things you've said and done. Perhaps you've crossed the line.
what is the electorate in Colorado? Because Colorado is a very complicated place right now politically. There's a lot of cross streams. We talked about it before. I find Colorado really fascinating because you have a lot of progressivism, but you also have some real deep pockets. You have some national, really super conservative groups and religious groups that are headquartered there. You also have an openly gay governor. You have a lot of inclusion. You have a lot of tradition and history. There's a lot of cross streams when it comes to Colorado. We understand that a congressional district can be pretty insular, but when you see something like what happened in the speaker fight, if she winds up getting isolated where she's not really part of the wider caucus and just doing the online stuff, is that something the electorate in Colorado is paying attention to? Do they put those two things together? It's like, look, you're on TV, but you're not really doing anything for us, or the other way around. How does it land with the people there that you're around?
I honestly think that if she had a strong primary contender, she had a really good person as a primary contender last time around. Don Coram, seasoned legislator, but a man in his 70s, man already in office and working for the people. And I think you need somebody who's younger and dynamic to take her on at the primary level. And I think it could happen. So Colorado, like you said, is kind of a complicated place. I grew up here. It was much more of a purple state then, where you could get a Republican governor. You very often had a Republican Secretary of State, Republican Attorney General. The state got an influx of millions of people, many of whom were Democrats, frankly, and now the numbers just don't look good. So Democrats outnumber Republicans in the state by a pretty substantial margin, with the exception of a couple of areas that remain Republican strongholds. Colorado Springs, we're focused on the family, is headquartered. That is one of those areas. The eastern part of the state, held by Ken Buck, also conservative, a lot of farms, small towns. And then the mountains do have some ski areas, wealthy Democrat strongholds like Aspen, but then the rest of the mountains, including the largest mountain city there, which is Grand Junction, is Republican. So you have strong candidates in those areas. You can have Republicans in office. The Weld County in the north should have gone Republican, but there was a libertarian spoiler that made a very liberal Democrat take that area. I think it's possible that in the future that could be picked up as well. But I do think that Boebert is the weakest link. I also think she's an embarrassment to the party. Things that she says are pretty cringeworthy. Here's the irony, though, is over the speaker fight, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a definitely more cringeworthy candidate or sitting office holder, actually went after Boebert, and now they're no longer besties. And Boebert is complaining about Greene, and Greene complaining about Boebert. So, if you don't like to watch the Kardashians, you can always watch C-SPAN.
Yeah, this is true, Krista Kafer. Let's be adults here, though. Marjorie Taylor Greene buddied up to Kevin McCarthy because she wants her committee assignments back. Because remember, she was stripped of that for her previous behavior, so that's why that's going on. And but you do. That's one of those you just sit back and we're like, nope, let them fight. One more thing on Colorado politics, though. You just mentioned it. We have a delineated line from some of these elections now. People don't like chaos, and they don't like the crazy. And by crazy, we mean the election denial stuff. You just mentioned it. If this Congress, the GOP majority Congress for the next 2 years, look, we know legislatively they're going to be pretty limited just by the math, and they don't have the Senate, and we've already seen like they can't do the easy stuff. I'm calling me skeptical they're going to get something big pushed through. If they just have nothing but investigations and that sort of rhetoric going into 2024, you just mentioned it. Colorado is a pretty purple, could go either way state in a lot of these races. How's that going to play, do you think, if all they have is the internet stuff, the investigation stuff? Not that there's maybe some important things there that needs to be done, but if that's all they got going in, how's that going to play?
Well, the percentage of people out there who genuinely care about Biden's laptop is, I don't know, 10%, 15%. So if you focus all of your time on investigations of a silly nature, I do think that the debacle in Afghanistan deserves some investigations. But the other stuff, it's not serious. I think that the Republican Party needs to become, again, that sort of big tent party, as opposed to trying to excite that 10, 15% of the deep red base. And that means putting forth serious ideas and being the party that is a serious alternative to Democrat policies. And Democrats, the policies are bad. The whole idea that we can tax and spend our way out of a deficit or a debt hole, the fact that we can continue to overregulate the economy, drive up inflation. Democrats need to own that, and they will own that when Republicans put forth serious ideas and get away from Trump and the far right fringe.
Yeah, I think so too. Krista Kafer, we always enjoy talking to you. One more thing, just what's some of the things, because look, East Coast, West Coast media bias is a real thing. What's a couple things out west that's playing kind of big picture over the next year? We know Congress and that sort of thing. What's a story or two you're just kind of keeping dog-eared for this could pop off in the spring or the summertime? What's one or two things you're watching that maybe the East Coast isn't paying attention to out west? What do you got on your radar?
Well, we definitely have issues with water out here. And so there's the western states, there's the upper basin and lower basin for the Colorado River, and figuring out how to divvy up that water, how to keep the dams that power up Las Vegas, keep those dams and generators running is important. But also places like Arizona and California are kind of the breadbasket of the nation. What do we need to do to make sure that that water eventually ends up going south, as well as being able to supply Front Range with water? And of course, we also have a big agricultural community here. And that's a little boring and wonky, but my eye is always there. Also, what happens when we don't have enough employees to work at restaurants, to work at retail outlets? What happens when sort of the change of population and we get we get fewer workers? What is that ultimately going to do for our economy is something that I am keeping an eye on. I think about my great-grandparents had 12 kids. My grandparents had 5. My parents had 2. My sister had 1, and I have no children. What happens when the population starts to decrease? What does that do to the economy? That's kind of a long-term thing, not obviously specifically West, something that's going to affect, I think, the entire country.
Yeah, that's a good one. One thing about it, though, is when you get those workers out there in the Denver area, wondering about those toll roads. I saw when my bill popped up after being out there for a week. Good Lord. I'm telling you. I thought the West Virginia
it's gotten expensive here.
Man, I racked up about $90 worth in about 5 days. It was pretty amazing. But anyway, I still enjoyed it. Denver was great. Highly recommended. Krista Kafer, always enjoy you. Till we get you back on Her Tale again, let folks know where they can keep up with you. We're going to link to your Substack to let people know where they can find it, your column at the Denver Post, and everything else you got going on, my friend.
Well, let's see. I got the Denver Post column. I got the Substack. I'm occasionally on 850 KOA and also 630 KHOW if you're within the reach of those radio stations. And then I also appear on Channel 12's Colorado Inside Out on occasion. So that's what I got going on. My biggest publicity, obviously, Her Tale.
Yeah, I hope so, but I'm not sure we're there yet. I mean it, though. Denver was a wonderful place. Actually, some of the people we were out there for a wedding, they're going to be having a baby next year. Hopefully get back out there. Maybe we'll do food and sometime do this live. So we don't have all the technical issues we had this time, my friend. Krista Kafer, always great having you, my friend.
Great. Yeah, great being there. And let's get together and have a big bowl of chili.
Sounds good. Talk soon.
All the music on Her Tale is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.